Okay, Republican presidential candidate Jeb Bush employed some really embarrassing contortionist moves over the weekend to explain how he could possibly blame Hillary Clinton for the attacks in Benghazi while simultaneously insisting that George W. Bush, his brother, was blameless for the September 11th, 2001 attacks. This started last week when Donald Trump was interviewed by Bloomberg, and he said, listen, George W. Bush was president during 9/11. Blame him, don't blame him. He was president. So this led to Jeb Bush responding to Donald Trump, saying he's pathetic. And then he was asked by Jake Tapper on CNN, how can you say Hillary's to blame for Benghazi, but Bush isn't at all to blame for 9/11? And here's Jeb Bush's answer. I've watched this 4 times, Lewis. I don't know what the hell is going on. I don't understand the explanation. Maybe you can figure it out. Let's look.
So what are you objecting to about Mr. Trump's remarks about 9/11 and your brother?
Look, my brother responded to a crisis, and he did it as you would hope a president would do. He united the country, he organized our country, and he kept us safe. And there's no denying that. The great majority of Americans believe that, and I don't know why he keeps bringing this up. It doesn't show that he's a serious person as it relates to being commander-in-chief and being the architect of a foreign policy. Across the spectrum of foreign policy, Mr. Trump talks about things that as though he's still on The Apprentice. I mean, literally talking about Syria, saying ISIS should take out Assad, then Russia should take out ISIS, as though it was some kind of board game and not a serious approach. This is just another example of the lack of seriousness, and this is a serious time. We're under grave threats again, and I think we need a president with a steady hand.
To play devil's advocate, do you think it's at all possible that your loyalty to your brother, while very admirable on a personal level, might be in some ways a political or policy liability, blinding you to mistakes he made?
No, I mean, so next week, Mr. Trump is probably going to say that FDR was around when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. It's what you do after that matters, and that's the sign of leadership. It's not does anybody actually blame my brother for the attacks on 9/11? If they do, they're totally marginalized in our society. It's what he did afterwards that matter, and I'm proud of him, and so are a bunch of other people. You don't have to have your last name named Bush to be able to understand that. And it just calls into question Mr. Trump's credibility as a commander-in-chief and an architect of the next generation foreign policy, which we desperately need in this country right now.
Obviously, Al-Qaeda was responsible for the terrorist attack of 9/11. But how do you respond to critics who ask, if your brother and his administration bear no responsibility at all, how do you then make the jump that President Obama and Secretary Clinton are responsible for what happened at Benghazi?
Well, it's the question on Benghazi, which is hopefully will now finally get the truth to, is was the place secure? They had a responsibility in the Department of State to have proper security. There were calls for security. It looks like they didn't get it. And how was the response in the aftermath of the attack? Was there a chance that these 4 American lives could have been saved?
Yeah, Jeb Bush appears to be in like a total fantasy world with regard to his brother's legacy and a basic understanding of logic. Bush didn't do 9/11, but if only the terrorists are responsible for 9/11, then only the attackers are responsible for Benghazi, right?
Yeah, I think that would make sense. Maybe 9/11 would have happened anyway. When Tapper says mistakes that were made when it comes to the Bush administration, I don't think he's just talking about, the 9/11 attacks. I think we're talking about everything that happened afterwards. And of course, Jeb does not want to touch that because most Americans agree that mistakes were made.
Well, that's the funny thing. The defenders of George W. Bush's national security record usually say, well, from September 12th on, it was a great administration with regard to foreign policy and national security. That is also insane. It's insane to ignore 9/11, especially since we know that on August 6th, 2001, George W. Bush received a memo called Bin Laden Determined to Strike the United States, and he did essentially nothing, as we found out from Richard Clark. The record on foreign policy after 9/11 was also insane. Iraq. I mean, do I have to say anything other than Iraq?
Not just foreign policy, domestic policy as well.
Yeah.
Like we just talked about in the first clip. We have all of that going on, domestic spying, you name it, Dave.
I do agree with Jeb Bush on one thing, which is that Donald Trump talks about foreign policy like it's the board game Risk. That's actually a really astute observation from Jeb.
Yeah, I think that is a good one, yeah. But, there's no way Jeb can ever badmouth his brother. And Dave, if it were you, if it were your brother, could you badmouth your own brother? It's difficult.
It is tough. And, this is just yet another reason why we really shouldn't have siblings of former presidents be president, because then you have a situation where they may make decisions in relation to past decisions that their sibling or father or husband or whoever made that are sort of under the context of not undermining or implicitly criticizing something that was done. So many reasons why in a country of 330 million, we shouldn't have to keep going back to the same families for presidents.